Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I wanted to do a topic that I've been thinking of doing for a long time because I think it's extremely important, and it provides context for why we have some of the discussions that we do about horses when we bring up welfare. Recently, which I'll share here, I saw a video of someone tacking up a racehorse, and the racehorse is showing a number of stress behaviors like trying to bite, trying to kick, tons of tail swishing, moving away, ears pinned, just a lot of signs of discomfort that are obvious signs of discomfort that are well documented across behavioral studies. And this behavior is shared in the context of saying that this is what it's like to tack up a mare, that this is what mares are like. And this narrative is so common in the industry, and it's really concerning because it stems from a sexist narrative where we're having this idea that female animals are more cranky and more likely to be difficult and an issue. And it's making light out of behaviors that are stress behaviors at their core. And the other thing with this is that, along with the joke of saying tacking up a mare, the caption of the video admits that this is a daily occurrence. So it provides context that this is a repeated issue with this particular horse. And the signs the horse is showing are very consistent with a horse who has stomach ulcers or underlying body pain, like kissing spine or muscular pain. And it makes it so that there's very, very likely a physical issue that's causing pain. And if there truly is no physical issue, which as a behavioral professional, I really, really doubt, I would be willing to bet money that if this horse was scoped, she would have ulcers. And if there are no ulcers, which for racehorses is exceptionally unlikely, because like 90% of racehorses who aren't actively being treated preventatively for ulcers end up having ulcers. And even if they are treated preventatively, if their life is that stressful, sometimes it doesn't work and they still end up having reoccurring ulcers. But even if there was no visible pain, this is a behavioral sign that the horse has a very negative association with her job. It has nothing to do with whether or not she's female. And wording it as such causes an environment where we have tons of horse people who shrug off communication from mares on the basis that they are just behaving like a mare and that mares are doomed to be these cranky, volatile creatures, when really we have a huge portion of mares who behave this way that are having their needs ignored and their attempts to communicate their needs ignored. And then they get increasingly more aggressive because they're being ignored. What I find interesting with this particular video is that overwhelmingly the response has been quite positive towards my response to the video, where people are agreeing with it and saying that the video is showing a very uncomfortable horse. However, the people that do not agree with my response, they often jump to trying to say that I'm generalizing horse behavior, that I don't know anything, that I'm attention seeking, or they'll start to mock me and my physical appearance or who I am as a person. They'll bring up their own horses and say that their horse does this and she's totally happy and she loves her job and that she's not in pain and they have a vet out all of the time and there's no issues. And they try to justify their position by bringing up these examples. And this is a really common thing. Like, and I wanted to bring this up because with this in specific, I used to work in the racing industry. I used to be a gallop rider. Like, that was literally my job where I was tacking and riding horses. So I can actually speak for what is normal behavior. And now that I've gone into studying equine behavior in a scientific perspective, it's altered a lot of my perspectives on things. I can no longer work at the racetrack because I hit the point where I was working there, and the more I learned, where I basically would have had to sell my soul to keep working there because I was just so uncomfortable with what I was seeing and how these behaviors were being shrugged off, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I had to make a choice. A lot of people who are put in that position where they start to notice things, or even if they start the job and they're already noticing things that make them uncomfortable, if they really want that job and they really want to make it in the industry and they really want to be an exercise rider, they make the choice of either staying and ignoring those behaviors and shrugging them off as a non-issue and essentially drinking the Kool-Aid so that they can stay in that environment without being as stressed by it. And doing so, you have to choose a state of denial. You can't honestly look at what's around you and not have an issue with it. You have to choose a state of denial if you want to stay in that environment and not be as stressed as what's going on, unless you truly do not care about the horses, which doesn't speak for most people who join the horse world in the first place. Or if you're noticing things that are making you uncomfortable and you cannot answer them in an ethical way and you cannot justify them, then you have to make the choice to leave, which could mean giving up your dreams or having your dreams have to shift, which is also a difficult choice. And a lot of people would rather stay in that industry and stay in denial. And this is something that we see across all horse industries. And this is where we get people who will defend even really obvious signs of discomfort and pain in horses or really obvious forms of abuse to the point where it's so obvious that the average person is like, I don't understand how someone can think this is okay. But it's because they've chosen the path of trying to justify anything they see because they cannot cope with having to look the discomfort of what is actually going on right in the face. And I was lucky when I was in the racing industry that my first boss that I had really did care about the horses, and she was unusual in that she would actually listen to my perspectives when I would say things. When I would have concerns about the horses, they were listened to. A lot of people do not have employers that do that. They will be shrugged off and they'll have to continue working and riding horses who are in pain or who are having behavioral issues, and it means endangering themselves, but also putting the horse in a bad position because you're just not taken seriously by your employer. So that furthers the impact of like needing to be in a state of denial because you learn that your voice is not listened to. And when that happens enough times, you just stop trying to say anything because it's not going anywhere. There's no point. And it's a really unfortunate place to be. But what this then causes when you have these people who are in a state of denial where they have to be around these highly stressed horses all the time, every day for their job, when they then go online and see people like me looking at these videos of horses that resemble what they deal with on a daily basis and being like, hey, that's a horse who is massively unhappy and in pain. They are infuriated by it. They are angered by it because I create discomfort in them internally that they are trying to push down and push away and ignore. And then I become the target of their animosity because I am a threat to that cognitive dissonance. And anyone like me who points out these things becomes a threat to that cognitive dissonance. And they will do whatever they can to try to shut down that threat and to try to discredit you and justify it in their heads, which is why people who are doing this type of thing tend to comment so much on videos that are talking about welfare issues. They are not secure in the decisions that they've made and what they're doing with horses and how their horses are behaving. Because if they were secure, they would be able to block people like me, scroll and move on and not be impacted by it. But instead, they dedicate like literally hundreds of comments sometimes. Like the biggest amount of comments that I get from people on a repeated basis from the same people are usually from the people who are trying to defend what they're doing. And they'll tell me I'm a nobody. They'll tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, that I'm spreading lies, that I'm stupid, that I'm worthless, that I can't ride, that I'm just jealous, whatever number of things. They'll come for my character and try to attack me, despite the fact that these things that I'm talking about with regards to horse discomfort, they are founded in science. So you can't just attack me because it doesn't change the information that I'm pulling from. It doesn't change the research of these equine scientists who are putting the information out there. Even if you just completely cut down my character and I disappeared off the face of the planet and you never had to hear from me again because I gave up, the information that I am pulling from still exists. I am merely a messenger that is bringing that information forward and sharing things that I think are problematic and sharing my opinion on them. That's that. But the fixation is on shooting the messenger because I'm the one that's causing them discomfort. They're not actively seeking out and looking at these studies and the scientific information. So when I come up on their For You page on TikTok or on Instagram, I am the threat. And I wanted to speak for that because I'm intimately familiar with being in that headspace because that is initially what I started to lean into when I was working in these fields and where I was seeing horses who were showing signs of stress. Not really to this degree, because honestly, I wouldn't even want to tack a horse that was pulling stuff like that to me, but relatively similar, where there would be times where I would be dealing with horses who were openly displaying signs of stress, and I would be very uncomfortable with it. But I have wanted to work in the horse industry for my whole life. It has been my dream since I was less than 4 years old to be a professional rider, to be paid for riding, to make it my career. And when that dream is threatened by the reality being a lot less glamorous than I envisioned it, initially, I wanted to push through and be like, this is the way that things are. Like, I can do harm reduction. Like, I can be more sensitive to these horses, or like, this is the way race horses are. And this is the narrative that those communities create because they'll go, this is a high-end racehorse. They're really fit. They're athletes. They want to win. They need to be aggressive to win. This is the way racehorses are. And when you're surrounded by groups of people who are saying that to you on a regular basis, and when you're surrounded by horses where there's such a high portion of horses who are behaving that way, it can start to feel normal and you can get desensitized to it and you can start to think that that is an accurate depiction of what racehorses are like. Instead of looking at it from a more broad spectrum and going, okay, these horses have a lot of shared trauma and a lot of shared practices that are creating discomfort. And that is why they all behave the same way. It is not because they're racehorses, but it's because most of them are stalled for 24/7 outside of their workouts if they're living in town at the racetrack because there is no option for turnout. They're fed high grain diets and that predisposes them to gastric issues and things like ulcers, along with the stress of how they're lived. And their training itself is stressful. They're all really young horses who are just learning how to be a horse and adjust to life that are now thrown into this lifestyle where they cannot exercise or expend energy on their own. They're always under the control of a person. And when they are explosive and difficult to manage, they get a lip chain thrown on, they get a chain over their nose, they're punished, they're sedated, whatever. So they're gagged at every turn when they're trying to just behave and trying to just like let out energy and trying to hit equilibrium. So then you have these chronically stressed horses whose behavioral responses are perpetually being gagged. And yes, a lot of them do end up behaving the same way, but it's because of how they are being handled, not because they're thoroughbreds, not because they're racehorses, because if as soon as you pull them out of that environment, immediate shift, immediate shift. Harlow, my mare, who's off the track, she used to kick and try to bite people while being groomed and tacked. Not unlike that mare. I should say while being groomed because I wasn't tacking and riding her during this time. And then I treated her for ulcers, and that, in addition to being turned out, resolved the issue. But I used to call leading her around flying a kite because that's what it was like. She'd be in the air, like walking on two legs and leaping above my head and stuff. But then as she settled into a 24/7 turnout lifestyle, and actually learned how to relax and stopped expecting high stress things anytime a person takes her out of her area, she became a completely different horse. And now she's super safe to handle and super dependable and super reliable. And it has nothing to do with the fact that they're a thoroughbred or a high-end racehorse or whatever. It is the environment and how they are handled that is creating that behavior. Even just shifting from the 24/7 stalling to allowing them more turnout would bring huge changes to those horses' behaviors. And there's also a reason why racehorses have such a high occurrence of ulcers. Like 90% of racehorses have ulcers, and it's because of the stress of the lifestyle. And racehorses are one of the most studied groups of horses because it's such a huge industry. And there are so many studies that depict the stress trends in racehorses. So this is something that it's like, I'm at the point where it's not even up for debate. It's just fact. And whether or not someone chooses to accept it is up to them. But if they choose to deny it, in that denial, you are not entitled to other people agreeing with you and telling you that you're right and trying to provide you with comfort by supporting your perspective or acting like it's an equal perspective that deserves to be heard just as much, because that's not the case. And anyways, the indoctrination that is involved when you're in these little echo chambers where everyone's saying things to try to justify the way that they're treating these horses and ignore what the behavior is actually saying in terms of the horse's experience, it's a really tough environment to be in because even as you're in denial, you have this internal pressure and discomfort that is always still there. And it makes you way more likely to lash out at people and horses and just generally be enraged by things and less able to emotionally regulate because you are stressed by how stressful the environment is. It is really rough to be in. Like, genuinely, I was a worse person when I was working at the racetrack, especially the track in town. I was a worse person. I was angrier more often with people in my day-to-day life, like my family and the horses, and I was less patient. I was more anxious, and it was because of that environment and what I had to put up with to be in it. And ultimately, that's why I was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't regret doing it from the standpoint of I learned a lot and it's provided me a lot of context for the welfare advocacy work that I do now. And it's also given me a little bit more credibility because people in those industries like to shrug off the opinions of people like me by being like, oh, well, you don't know what it's like to work with racehorses. But it's like, yes, I do. Out of any type of horse, I have worked with thoroughbred racehorses the most. The most. I've ridden more racehorses than any other type of horse on and off the track. I've trained them on the track. I've started racehorses. I've ridden them and galloped them. We've done gait schooling. I've groomed them. I've done hot walking. I've retrained them after the track. I've rehabbed injuries. I've rehabbed behavioral injuries. I have worked with those horses the most, and I have a lot to say about the industry. In my heart, I feel like if there was a shift in terms of the horse's welfare at the track to allow for more turnout and more species appropriate care, that racing at its core in terms of how the horses are trained and the behaviors we're asking them to do, it could be one of the more ethical disciplines because teaching a horse to run essentially in a straight line is a lot less steps than teaching them how to perform a dressage test or jump a course. But the problem is the structure of that industry is not conducive to horse welfare. Starting horses at 2 years old and younger is not conducive to horse welfare. Having the biggest portion and like the most important races in their careers be at like 3 years old is not conducive to horse welfare. There's a lot of wastage. There's a lot of horses who are injured. Horses at the track are starting to be called old by the time they're like 5, 6, 7, 8. Like they would call horses that are those age old man or like old woman or grandma or grandpa because it is less common for horses to continue racing past a certain point and actually being successful. And they are more crotchety and like sore because they're more likely to have arthritis. And a horse should not be considered old by 8 years old because they're not. Even 10 or 11 or 12, they're not old. It is a byproduct of how they're being handled and raced. And I love thoroughbreds. I have a lot of love for people in the racing industry because I met some really amazing people who taught me things that were valuable and who deeply cared about the horses and who also cared about my perspective on things and actually listened. So this isn't to say that every single person within that industry is guilty, but that industry is an echo chamber that is trying to normalize a lot of behaviors in horses that are not healthy or normal, such as what we watched in that video of that mare. If you have to muzzle your horse when you're tacking it to avoid being bitten, there is a problem. Even if your horse is tied up and cannot bite you, the fact that they're trying to bite you to stop you from tacking them up is a problem. We cannot, in good faith, say that horses like their jobs if we have to restrain them in such a way just to get equipment on them. Horses know what being tacked up means, especially once they become a seasoned horse who's not just like green, 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 green. They know that being tacked predicts being riding. And whether it is a physical issue or not does not matter. It doesn't matter if there's physical pain or if it's an emotional pain. If they are reacting that violently to being tacked, they do not like their jobs. In fact, they fucking hate them. They do not like their jobs. They are telling you, I hate this. Stop doing this to me. I don't like this. And it could not be more clear. It couldn't. It couldn't be more clear. That mare is clear as day with how unhappy she is, and she is being ignored. Imagine that you have your one caretaker, the person closest to you who's supposed to be advocating for you, and you are screaming at them, you are hurting me, I don't like this, and shouting, and they just continue to ignore you and try to restrain you more and just keep doing what they're doing. It is a horrific thing to imagine, but that is the reality for a lot of horses. And I know that that's uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear, but we're going to need to start getting comfortable with it. Otherwise, decisions are going to be made for the horse industry from outside entities, and they will step in and they're going to police the industry to a way stricter degree than what we could do within it if we partnered with welfare advocates and equine scientists to make a difference for the horses. A lot of the problem behaviors that we see in horses would be resolved if we just cared for them differently and trained them in a more ethical manner. There wouldn't be these big, explosive, dangerous behaviors. They're a direct result of improper handling and improper management of horses because we're not treating them like the flight animals that they are. We are putting them in little boxes, restraining them at every corner, not letting them to react to anything, and then punishing them when they do have a reaction that we're not able to completely restrain. And it just creates a ticking time bomb. It's like holding a stick of dynamite with a lighter right next to it all the time and walking around and be like, oh no, it's fine, it's perfectly safe. That's what people are doing. We are literally creating our own demise of the industry, and we're also creating a whole lot of dangerous situations with horses that are completely avoidable. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. As someone who has previously been in a state of cognitive dissonance and denial, that is absolutely what people that react so strongly to these types of discussions are doing. They're trying to maintain that denial, and they are threatened by anyone who is forcing them to come face to face with reality, and that's why they can't cope. For me now, where I am with my horses now, there's very little that people could say about me and my horses that would actually really upset me unless it's something where they're trying to like damage my business or my career using complete falsehoods. And then the issue there is that it's defamation. It's not what they're saying. People can tell me that clicker training is stupid and doesn't work until they're blue in the face. I know it does. I've seen the difference it makes for my horses, so I don't care. But I had a lot more to prove when I felt guilty deep down about the way that I was handling my horses and other horses. And when people would bring that to the surface, I would fight them tooth and nail until I was blue in the face because I didn't want to have to sit with the discomfort that they were causing me. And I thought that if I could just prove them wrong or feel like I did and like win the argument, that that discomfort would go away. But fun fact, spoiler alert, it never did until I actually dealt with what was causing the discomfort, which was being in denial and having to be around chronically stressed horses whose stress I could literally feel emanating off of them. And as soon as I acknowledged the elephant in the room, it became a lot easier to deal with, even if there was an initial portion of grief to have to grieve like what I had envisioned my career being, because that was still hard. I'm not going to downplay that. It is hard having to shift the way that you see the horse world and having to notice how prevalent stressed horses are in the industry and how often people ignore them. It is very, very triggering. So now my new trigger is just seeing people double down and defend stuff like this, especially when it's like a really, really obvious example, because this is just like a horse that is absolutely screaming. And I think that's what I struggle with the most is seeing people still not see an issue when it is so blatantly apparent. And the industry is just in such a pickle because the average person that is not a horse person and hasn't been around horses at all is actually more adept at noticing stress behaviors than a lot of lifelong horse people are, because the horse people have been indoctrinated into believing that certain things are normal, whereas the person outside of the horse industry hasn't. So thank you for listening. That's my rant for the day. I have a hard time seeing what people justify, and it's like triggering because it's like I know I used to do the same thing, and like right now all I can do is just share my piece and like speak out and say things and hope that it'll help those who are willing to shift, develop a new perspective, or at least help pressure the industry so that we do see meaningful change, because I feel so deeply sad for horses like this that have to exist in this state of stress and who are advocating for themselves as hard as they can and still being ignored. Like that mare is trying to advocate for herself and she's being muzzled and ignored and then posted on TikTok to make fun of her behavior as if it's like some lighthearted joke when it's a really upset horse. And that's not something to laugh at. It also bodes poorly for women as a whole that we have created this narrative where when female animals are talking or like talking in their own way about their pain and trying to like say, hey, I'm uncomfortable, that their pain is laughed at and just labeled as them being female and them being like cranky or like hormonal. And women have the same thing happen to them too in the medical field and by their partners and by their friends. Their pain and discomfort and their grief is downplayed and ignored. And there's no way around the fact that doing that to animals perpetuates the same cycle amongst human women. So that's also worth addressing, but that's like a separate issue that I've done a podcast episode on before. So anyone interested in listening to that more in depth can go there. Anyways, thank you for listening. I'm going to be trying to post more videos on YouTube now because I've taken a little bit of a break. I've just released a new podcast that's like the sister podcast to my main podcast, which is Making Milestones. The sister podcast is called Main Character Energy, and I have a co-host, my friend Danny, and it's pretty funny. I highly recommend checking it out. I'll leave the links down below. I'm also in a contest for Forbes Entrepreneur of the Year, and I need to be in first place as of tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time in order to advance to the next round. So I'll leave the link down below to vote for me on that. You can vote once every 24 hours. I would super appreciate it. And also if you could send it to your friends, family, etc., to get more votes. If you share it, that would be really appreciated because that opportunity could be life-changing for me. Also, if you're interested in supporting my podcast or my YouTube or want behind the scenes tutorials and whatnot, I also have a Patreon channel with tutorials behind the scenes and more, and monthly Q&As, and you can check that out down below in the description as well. And you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. So thank you so much for listening, everyone, and let me know your thoughts on this topic.